In the world of power, two names echo louder than most: Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. One, the former president who redefined America's political stage. The other, the man who has held Russia in his grip for more than 2 decades. Together, they are not just politicians. They are symbols of influence, ego, and ambition that ripple far beyond their borders. Their meetings, their words, even their silences, shape alliances, fracture trust, and spark fears across continents. For some, their connection looks like a strategic partnership. For others, it's a dangerous game of shadows where democracy, sovereignty, and even the fate of nations are at stake. But the truth is never simple. And behind the public smiles and staged handshakes lies a story darker, stranger, and far more dangerous than it appears. This is not a tabloid headline. This is the anatomy of power, told through secrets, betrayals, and global consequences. And before we dive in, there's one thing you need to know. Before we go any further, let's be clear. Everything you are about to hear is based on information from open sources, global media, political analysis, and publicly available records. You don't have to take our word for it. In fact, we encourage you not to. Check the sources yourself, compare perspectives, question everything. Because what you'll hear in this video is not a verdict, it's an interpretation. Our interpretation. Which means it's subjective, imperfect, and very likely different from what others might tell you. But that's the point. Power is never a single story. It's layers of narratives, contradictions, and agendas. And when it comes to Trump and Putin, those layers run deeper than most of us imagine. So, with that said, let's step into the shadows, where politics turns into theater and theater turns into something far more dangerous. Donald Trump was never just another businessman. From the very beginning, he was packaged. The son of a real estate developer, raised not on the streets of Queens but inside a gilded bubble, Trump learned one lesson early. It's not about what you build, it's about how big your name looks on the building. And for him, 5 giant golden letters were always bigger than concrete, glass, or steel. In the 80s and 90s, while America wrestled with Wall Street greed and collapsing industries, Trump reinvented himself as a spectacle. Casinos, hotels, beauty pageants, reality TV, he turned his life into a never-ending ad campaign. Not for a product, but for himself. And this is where we find his core. Trump is not just a politician or even a businessman. He is a brand of chaos. A living logo. The man who looked at history and said, "Why be a footnote when I can be the headline?" When he ran for president, the world laughed, but laughter turned into disbelief when he actually won. His rallies became arenas, his tweets weapons, his scandals entertainment. Trump didn't just step into politics, he dragged politics into the circus tent and sold tickets. But here's the thing, beneath the showmanship, there's an obsession with immortality through recognition. He doesn't just want power, he wants the textbooks. He wants to be remembered, not as a chapter, but as the whole damn book. And that's why Trump matters in this story. Because when a man who thrives on spectacle gets his hands on nuclear codes, foreign alliances, and the stage of global politics, the line between entertainment and apocalypse gets dangerously thin. If Trump is the showman, Vladimir Putin is the shadow. Where Trump screams, Putin whispers. Where Trump builds towers, Putin builds silence. He came from a very different world. The back alleys of Leningrad, sharpened by street fights, molded in the discipline of the KGB. A spy. A man trained not to be seen, but to watch. Not to speak, but to wait. When Boris Yeltsin plucked him from near obscurity and handed him the keys to Russia, nobody outside the Kremlin really knew who Putin was. But that was the point. He was the perfect successor, quiet, loyal-looking, underestimated. And then it began. From the start, Putin's rule carried one clear message: break your own so that strangers fear you more. Journalists silenced. Oligarchs exiled. Opponents poisoned or vanished. The stories swirl around him like ghostly rumors. The mysterious wealth hidden behind shell companies, the palace by the Black Sea, the strange health rumors, the plastic surgery theories. A man surrounded by speculation, but never confirmation. That's his genius. You don't have to prove anything when fear is stronger than fact. Putin doesn't thrive on applause like Trump. He thrives on control. Every photo, every televised meeting, every awkwardly long table is choreography. He's not selling himself as a brand. He's selling himself as inevitability. And yet, beneath the cold calculation, there's a paradox. A former spy who became obsessed with rewriting Russia's destiny. A man who sees the collapse of the Soviet Union as the greatest tragedy of the 20th century and spends the 21st trying to reverse it. Unlike Trump, who craves immortality through headlines, Putin seeks immortality through maps. For him, it's not about being remembered in textbooks. It's about making sure textbooks themselves are rewritten to include his empire. This is Vladimir Putin, the shadow at the table, the cold hand on the chessboard, the player who doesn't just want to win, he wants the game to never end. And here's where the story stops being biography and becomes a battlefield. In 2022, Vladimir Putin sent Russian troops into Ukraine. The official reasons changed with the wind: denazification, protection of Russian speakers, restoring historical lands. But beneath the shifting words, one truth remained. This was about empire, about taking back what he believed had been lost when the Soviet Union collapsed. For Europe, this war was not just a distant conflict. It was a nightmare creeping closer. For Poland, for the Baltic states, for Germany, Putin's tanks rolling into Ukraine were more than headlines. They were echoes of wars Europe swore would never return. Refugees poured across borders, energy markets collapsed, and every capital asked the same question: who's next? And then came Trump. Out of office, but never out of the spotlight. He styled himself as the one man who could make a deal. Not NATO, not the EU, not even Ukraine itself. Trump made himself the self-declared mediator between Putin and the West. But here's the danger. What does it mean when the mediator is also a showman? When the man at the center of negotiations measures success not in peace, but in applause? For Europeans, Trump's role as a peace broker is a double-edged sword. On one hand, maybe he can reach Putin where others failed. On the other, maybe he's willing to trade away principles for a headline, for that one moment where cameras flash and history writes his name. For Ukraine, the fear is sharper, because every closed-door handshake between Trump and Putin risks being a bargain made without them. A future negotiated over their heads. A peace built not on justice, but on performance. And this is the real threat. Not just missiles and tanks, but the possibility that the fate of nations could be reduced to theater. That Europe's security, Ukraine's sovereignty, and the balance of the world order could be decided not in parliaments or institutions, but in a snowy room in Alaska, behind a door that never opened for the rest of us. For years, Donald Trump was the former president, a figure haunting America's politics from the sidelines, chasing rallies and headlines, but not anymore. With his return to the White House, Trump is no longer a commentator. He is once again the commander-in-chief, the man with the nuclear codes, the Oval Office, and the authority to redraw America's role in the world. And he wasted no time. Where the Biden administration struggled to contain Putin's war in Ukraine, Trump positioned himself as the one who could succeed. Not through alliances, not through institutions, but through personality. Through the deal. The idea that he alone could sit across from Putin and hammer out a peace no one else dared to imagine. But what does that mean for the future? For Europe, it means fear. Fear that America's commitments to NATO could be traded away in a handshake. Fear that Ukraine's fate could be negotiated without Ukraine in the room. Fear that the security order built after World War II could be rewritten overnight by two men sitting across a frozen table in Alaska. For Ukraine, it means uncertainty. Every promise, every negotiation, every peace plan could come at the cost of territory, sovereignty, or independence. And when history is written by strong men, the voices of the victims are too often silenced. For the world, it means a dangerous precedent. If Trump and Putin can decide the fate of nations behind closed doors, then democracy itself becomes fragile. Global order becomes theater. And the script is written not by institutions or peoples, but by egos. The Alaska summit may look like one meeting, but in reality it is a signal that the rules are shifting, that history is being rewritten in real time, and that the next chapters will not be safe, stable, or predictable. Because Trump is once again president, wielding real power, while Putin remains the master of shadows. And in this new reality, the future doesn't belong to clear agreements. It belongs to uncertainty, to deals struck out of sight, to consequences we may only recognize when it's already too late. In the end, the Alaska summit wasn't about treaties or peace or even diplomacy. It was about power condensed into its purest form, two men, two egos, behind one closed door. And that's the terrifying truth. The fate of millions no longer rests in parliaments or congresses or the voices of nations. It rests in whispers we will never hear, in handshakes we will never see, in agreements drafted not for the people, but in spite of them. Democracy promises that history is written by the many. But this summit reminded us that history is still too often written by the few, with pens dipped in secrecy and inked in ambition. Trump sits once again in the Oval Office. Putin still commands from the Kremlin's shadows. And the world holds its breath, not waiting for resolutions, but for the next closed door. Because the greatest danger isn't what they say in front of cameras. It's what they decide when the cameras are gone. And by the time we learn the truth, it may already be too late. Behind every headline lies another story, a darker one. Here, you'll find dark side stories that shape the world. We'll uncover the secrets they never wanted you to know, one episode at a time. Subscribe and don't miss what's coming next.